Mr. Fallon, did you watch Jeremy Corbyn's speech or have you read it?
No, I've read it.
Why do you think it's so muddled? Which bit?
Oh, the idea that the attack in Manchester could be traced back to British foreign policy, that it's somehow somebody else's fault. It's the fault of the British government or somebody else.
Where did he say that?
The attack in Manchester was clearly the responsibility of the attacker. Well, that's the implication of the speech.
How? I mean, where do you get it from? Which bit?
Because he talks about foreign interventions and he implies that somehow this attack can be explained away on the basis of previous foreign interventions by successive governments, and that's wrong.
I don't know which draft you've read, but I mean, the bit I've got is that he says the blame is with the terrorists. But if we are to protect our people, we must be honest about what threatens our security. We must be brave enough to admit the war on terror is simply not working. What's wrong about that?
Well, what's wrong about that is there have been attacks in our country that have been nothing to do with the war against terror. For example, 2005, the London bombings, that was well before we got involved in Libya. Paris was attacked very badly when France wasn't involved in the war in Iraq.
But 2005 was after
connection.
Iraq, wasn't it?
Sorry?
2005 was after Iraq, wasn't it?
No, but it was before Libya. You know, the attack on the Twin Towers, that was well before the Iraq war. So there's no correlation here between foreign policy and this appalling act of terrorism. And that's where Jeremy Corbyn has gone wrong.
Isn't it possible that things like the Iraq war did not create the problem of murderous Islamic fundamentalists, but the war has unquestionably sharpened the resentments felt by such people in this country and given them a new pretext?
Well, I don't think you should allow pretexts for people who blow up innocent children.
Because those are actually the words of Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary.
Well, they're not entitled to excuses. You know, this was an act of murder, and of callous murder at that, taking the lives of innocent civilians.
What I just put to you was not Jeremy Corbyn, it was Boris Johnson.
Well, what were the words you were quoting?
The Iraq war did not create the problem of murderous Islamic fundamentalists, though the war has unquestionably sharpened the resentments felt by such people in this country and given them a new pretext. He goes on to say the Iraq war did not introduce the poison into our bloodstream, but yes, the war did help to potentiate that poison. That's exactly the same as what Jeremy Corbyn is saying now.
No, I think it's more is what he's saying that of what I've said. He said you can't use attacks like this to explain away terrorism.
Actually, on the contrary, he said it is difficult to deny that they have a point, the Told You So Brigade.
Well, I don't agree with that.
So Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, is wrong?
Well, I'd have to see the words that you're trying to quote to me. I don't have them in front of me.
Well, I've just told you them.
Well, I'll have to look at them. What I don't accept is that you can explain away terrorist attacks in this country by simply saying there's been an issue with our foreign policy over the last few years.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn agrees with you on that. He says no rationale based on the actions of any government can remotely excuse or even adequately explain outrages like this week's massacre.
Yeah, but he then goes on to talk about the war against terror, which he would like to have conducted in a different way.
Well,
Indeed,
do you think the war on terror is working?
Just a minute. Indeed, he implies that we should, in the end, sit down and talk to terrorists. Now, these people, the terrorists who attacked the Manchester Arena on Monday night, he didn't want to negotiate. He didn't make demands. He didn't take hostages. He wanted to kill as many innocent people as possible. You can't talk to terrorists like that.
Yes, I think Mr. Corbyn agrees with you on that. Do you think the war on terror is working, then?
Well, we've certainly achieved success so far in Iraq and Syria. We've liberated in under 3 years now of successive coalition actions, 65 countries working together. We have liberated over 4 million people from living under Daesh rule, a rule of beheadings, of rape, of throwing gays off buildings. 4 million people have been liberated in those two countries. In Afghanistan, still a fragile democracy, but they have elections. We have 3 million girls now attending school in Afghanistan. These are fragile places, but yes, we are reducing the terrorist threat in both countries. And if we do that, ultimately, we can reduce the threat of terrorism here at home.
The threat of terrorism at home is at its highest level since you came to power, isn't it?
Well, there are threat levels that go up and down all the time. We're not alone in seeing attacks here. Other European countries have seen them.
When was the last time it was this high?
A few years ago. But
before you were in power?
but, well, it doesn't, it's the attack threat level has got nothing to do with who the government of the day is. It's set independently by the Joint Analysis Centre. It's nothing to do with the
I'm trying to
the
work out whether
government.
the threat to Britain has gone up or down since you came to power.
The threat to Britain has certainly changed since we've been in power. It's gone up and down, and I hope it'll go down again.
But it's up at the moment, yes?
It's up at the moment, it certainly is.
So what makes you think the war on terror is working?
The war on terror in Iraq...
In a British context?
Well, as I've just explained to you, the war in Iraq is certainly working. Daesh have now been reduced to controlling less than 10% of Iraqi territory. They've lost huge amounts of territory in Syria. Over in Afghanistan, the government is holding the line against Taliban with a lot of international support, and both countries, both Iraq and Afghanistan, have been able to have elections and introduce education for their young people. Now that in the end, you know, is progress. And we're part of an international coalition to make sure we keep that up. Because if we do, it will reduce the impact of terrorism on our own streets.
Let's talk about Libya then, because this bomber was of Libyan origin. And of course, a few years ago, the British government was on the same side as this bomber's family in trying to overthrow Gaddafi in Libya. Last year, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which is chaired by one of your colleagues, Sir Crispin Blunt, a Conservative, said that the result of the Libyan policy, which was not informed by accurate intelligence, was the growth of Islamic State in North Africa. Do you agree with that?
Well, what happened in Libya was we intervened, and not just us, other countries intervened, at the request of the Arab League with international support to prevent a massacre in Benghazi and to try and lead Libya to a better political settlement.
But was the report correct?
Well, hang on, that settlement hasn't yet come about. There are warring factions still in Libya. They're not all Islamist terror groups. There are different factions in Libya struggling for control. We continue to work for a political settlement. But let's look back at who this man...
But is it true that ISIL has grown in North Africa after the Libyan war?
ISIL actually has just been defeated in Sirte, where it's stronghold in Libya. But let's go back to your point.
But overall...
It looks like...
Look, if we could just have an answer to this question. Is the Select Committee right to say ISIL in North Africa has grown?
No, they're not wholly right. ISIL, in fact, has been defeated in the city of Sirte, that it was its stronghold. There are still some ISIL factions in Libya, but there are lots of other warring groups in Libya. And let's remember that Mr. Abedi's father was given refuge in this country because he fled Gaddafi's regime much earlier, before any British intervention.
Have you established whether or not the British security services or military were ever in touch with the Abedi family at the time of the overthrow of Gaddafi, when they were working for the overthrow of Gaddafi, and so was Britain?
No, I can't help you with that. I've no knowledge of that.
Are you looking into it?
Well, the whole picture around Abedi and his family and his networks is being investigated at the moment. It's a very fast-moving investigation, and I can't update you on that.
OK. Can I just come to the other main point of Mr. Corbyn's speech then, which is that at home we will reverse the cuts to our emergency services and police. There will be more police on the streets under a Labour government. What's wrong with that?
Well, the number of police officers on the streets increased slightly under a Labour government, and we had the London bombings of 2005. So it's not the actual number of officers, it's the resources you dedicate to counter-terrorism, it's the number of armed officers you're able to put out on the street, it's the amount of money you spend on your intelligence and security services, and all of those budgets we have protected and we're now increasing.
In 2015, Theresa May was warned by the police that her cuts to police numbers would lead to a paramilitary style of policing. She accused them of crying wolf. They were right and she was wrong.
No, I don't accept that. We haven't seen a paramilitary style of policing.
What, soldiers on the streets?
We're seeing more armed officers on patrol, but those armed officers...
And soldiers?
No, they're not patrolling. Those armed officers are out on patrol. We have replaced those that were doing static guarding, standing outside power stations or foreign embassies or the Houses of Parliament.
Because there aren't enough police.
They have been replaced freeing up more armed police officers to go out on patrol, protect the public in crowded spaces like railway stations and shopping centres and sporting events. But those are police officers and not troops. The troops are only doing static guarding duties.
The point of the Cry Wolf story is that there was, in the end, a wolf. That is what's happened.
No, I don't accept that. We're increasing the number of armed officers. There have been terrorist attacks in cities right across Europe, and there have been terrorist attacks in London and other places before. What we are doing is spending more on counter-terrorism, and the senior officers in charge of counter-terrorism in this country have made it very clear that they have the resources that they need.
Mr. Fallon, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.